Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Let me see, hope I'm coming in okay. Yes, good. It's working. I'm using Streamlabs for the first time. I haven't necessarily used this. I looked at I looked at an example by Beltazar. Actually, he made an example video, sent it to me on YouTube. So I went through that one. I didn't necessarily go through all of it, not for all of the details. I watched the entire video, but I haven't did all of the details of it. I haven't replicated it, but enough to actually get up and running. So hopefully this is doing what it's supposed to do. Now, from my standpoint, I want to thank everyone who supports the show. And I'm thanking everyone who supports the show because Google has completely demonetized my entire channel, meaning super chats and the money that I was supposed to get on the videos I no longer can get. They've essentially stolen, or they will steal, several thousands of dollars going up to August 31st. And so the people who support the channel, it matters that much more. Like, it makes it that much more clear on how important user support is. So when you hear your YouTube creators talking about Patreon and talking about PayPal and talking about all these other avenues, this is why, and it's for stuff like this. It is a multinational corporation that makes any decision on a whim. And unless you are a large channel like Young Turks or Adore or, something to that effect where you have hundreds of thousands or millions of subscribers, they don't care. They don't care. That said, I think, I could be wrong, but I think there is a donation thing at the bottom. And of course, like I said, August is User Appreciation Month, Patron Appreciation Month. So, sorry, I'm checking my thing to make sure this is coming through okay. All right, good. Good. All right, good. Just making sure it's working. All right. They're trying to kill independent media. Lori, well, if you get to the point where you eliminate the funding mechanism, then it would put a dent in independent media. But there are some people, I would imagine, that don't necessarily need the funding and just do it on the side. But in my case, it just makes the patrons that much more important, or PayPal, or whatever. I was trying to add a donation thing on this, but I may not have added this correctly. So I'll try to get it for the next video. But that's it. Let's do the news. Robert Fisk. Robert Fisk is a journalist in the UK. Robert Fisk is an amazing journalist, and I use journalist in the most euphoric way that the term can be used. We already knew that the United States, Saudi Arabia, was supplying weapons to terrorists, to ISIS. We knew that the United States was giving aid and assistance to terrorists. This was in the open. This wasn't like, the Iran-Contra affair where Reagan was giving weapons kind of on the sly. Obama wouldn't necessarily openly say this, but everybody had already knew this. It had already, for all intents and purposes, been proven and nailed down that, yes, the United States was supplying weapons to terrorists to try to take down the Syrian government. Fox News, even Fox News, had interviewed one of the guys who had gave some of his weapons over in order to keep himself safe because they would have cut his head off if he didn't give the weapons. So he was giving the weapons over in some cases as a bribe. Robert Fisk has gone to Syria. And in these bombed out weapons shelters, Robert Fisk has looked at what was taking place in ISIS bombed out shelters that Syria has retaken. And what did he find? He was looking at missile casings. And he was looking at the numbers on those missile casings and, as a journalist, tracking them back to their manufacturer and tracking them back to where they were, you could say, sent off. The problem here is this was not missiles recovered from somewhere, meaning there was a bomb, there was a war, they got these missiles from the ground and they kind of took them back. No, these were missiles that were still in batches, meaning one, let's say like 017X602, 017X603, 04, 05, 06. It was a batch. It wasn't just one or two, it was batches. Robert Fisk took on the goal of trying to trace these back to their manufacturers. And guess where he went? Trace them back to. I'll give you one guess. Now here's the thing. It's not that these weapons were delivered directly to terrorists. Like, hello, Mr. Terrorist, here's your batch of weapons from the United States or from NATO. It was more surly than that. It was more so they were delivered to one place, but there were no checks in place. There was no mechanism to even check to see where they were going to at the end of that delivery point, meaning the weapons manufacturers had no way of knowing where the end point of the weapons were going to end up. So if they ended up, let's say, in Saudi Arabia, and then Saudi Arabia just so happened to allow them to end up somewhere else, oops, sorry. And especially take this in the context of multiple nations. The United States, I believe Turkey was part of this, but yeah, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Israel, all of them, France, Britain, following essentially in the United States lead, saying that they're vassal states at this point. All of them wanting Bashar al-Assad out of that seat, and all of them perfectly willing to turn the other eye on weapons ending up in the hands of terrorists, seeing as they were supporting these terrorists. Robert Fisk's story is amazing, and Robert Fisk is doing the job what a real journalist would do, asking one real and basic question. Shouldn't NATO and the United States have some way of knowing where the weapons are going to end up? These extraordinarily expensive weapon systems that have the capacity to kill thousands, millions of human beings. Shouldn't we know where they end up? That's what he's getting on to. And he's asking this kind of basic question of why don't we know where these weapons end up? So he starts the task of tracing these weapons back to their original point of origin. This article is amazing. I'm putting 2 at the bottom so you can see it for yourself. Fisk and Zero Hedge does a good reading of this, but I'm going to read part of this because part of this makes the point of the entirety of the article. But he even goes from this other conflict, that same thing, Lebanese war, where these weapons, again, were ending up in people's hands that were not necessarily, let's say, ended up in unsavory characters' hands. Let's say it that way. So this is Fisk. Independent. Let's see. Right here. I trace missile casings in Syria back to their original sellers, so it's time for the West to reveal who they sell arms to. I don't think either NATO or the EU has the slightest interest in chasing the province of weapons into the hands of Islamic fighters in Syria or anywhere else in the Middle East. Readers, a small detective story. Note down this number, MFGBGM71E1B, and this number, stock number 141000130000254, and this code, DAAA01C0292. I found all of these numerals printed on the side of a spent missile casing lying in the basement of a bombed-out Islamic base in eastern Aleppo last year. At the top were the words, Hughes Aircraft Company, founded in California back in the 1930s by the infamous Howard Hughes, and sold in 1997 to Raytheon, the massive U.S. defense contractor whose profits last year came to $23.35 billion. Shareholders include the Bank of America and Deutsche Bank. Raytheon's Middle East offices can be found in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Israel, Egypt, Turkey, and Kuwait. There were dozens of other used-up identical casings in the same underground room in the ruins of eastern Aleppo, with sequential coding. In other words, these anti-armor missiles, known in the trade as TOWs, tube-launched optical tracked and wire-guided missiles, were not individual items smuggled into Syria through the old, much-reported CIA smugglers trail from Libya. These were shipments, whole batches of weapons that left the point of origin on military aircraft pallets. He's saying this is a bombshell. This is a bombshell. This is not this thing of weapons being kind of done behind the scenes. This is these weapons, whole batches of weapons that left the point of origin on military aircraft pallets. Let's keep going. Some time ago in the United States, I met a Hughes aircraft executive who laughed when I told him my story of finding his missiles in eastern Aleppo. When the company was sold, Hughes had been split up into 8 components, he said, but assuredly this batch of rockets had left the United States government's base. Amateur sleuths may have already tracked down the first set of numbers. Above, the 01 in the stock is a NATO coding for the United States, and the BGM-71E is a Raytheon Systems Company product. There are videos of Islamist fighters using BGM-71E 1B variety in Idlib province 2 years before found the casings of other anti-tank missiles in neighboring Aleppo. As for the code DAA-A01C0292, I am still trying to track that number. Now, right here by itself, this is somewhat mind-blowing. Companies in the United States are building weapons that are being used to kill Americans. Are we okay with that? I mean, how many Americans have been fighting in Syria at this point? How many weapons have been used? And they are using our weapons to attack us and to attack government forces. We have allied ourselves with the terrorists in this case. By the same token, you've had situations where groups of the CIA backing versus the army backing fighting one another. Understand this, what we're saying here. Either the terrorists are working with us and we're giving them these weapons so they can attack the Syrian government, which is probably more likely, or we are actually there to fight ISIS, in which case the weapons ISIS is using to fight us are also supplied by the United States manufacturers. Please tell me you can see the problem here. When we're going to war, companies should not be able to make a profit off of wartime items. I bet you war will start to fade away pretty goddamn quickly if people could make profit off of war. As it stands, however, our weapons are in their hands, and they're using those weapons to attack us and the Syrian government, and I imagine Russia and whoever else they're fighting. There's no guarantee this promise will be kept, as the arms manufacturers I've been talking to in the Balkans over the past weeks yet again confirm there is neither an obligation nor an investigative mechanism on the part of the arms manufacturers to ensure that their infinitely expensive products are not handed over by the buyers to ISIS, al-Nusra, or al-Qaeda, which is clearly the case in Aleppo, or some other anti-Assad Islamist group in Syria branded by the United States Department itself as being a terrorist organization. Of course, the weapons might have been sent to a nice, cuddly moderate militia like the now largely non-existent Free Syrian Army, many of whose weapons, generously donated by the West, have fallen into the hands of the bad guys, quote-unquote bad guys, the folks we want to overthrow the Syrian regime, which would please the West, but who would like to set up an Islamic cult dictatorship in its place, which would not please the West. Do you know how stupid this sounds? I mean, Fisk is right here. Ultimately, we are okay with weapons falling into the hands of terrorists. So you give it to the Free Syrian Army, who are supposed to be the cuddly terrorists. And those cuddly terrorists may just so happen to hand them over to the non-cuddly terrorists. The non-cuddly terrorists being wanting to set up a cult-like dictatorship. I would say have a conversation with the people who were under some of those rabid cult-like head choppers and rapists. What did those people, those Syrians, think living under that dictatorship, or those, you can call them theocrats? That gives you some idea of what they were trying to set up and who we, the West, was supporting in this scenario. What we wanted in this was somewhat weird. This idea that Obama had to fight both ISIS and Assad at the exact same time, with some degree, even on its face, nonsense. But the media didn't look at this as being nonsense. The media said, hey, that's what he said he's doing, so that's what he's doing. How on earth are you doing that? How do you get both? You get one or the other. You don't get both. You have Assad, or you have the terrorists. Your Free Syrian Army became non-existent relatively quickly. There were no cuddly terrorists. I'm just saying. His main point here is, you give weapons to one, there's nothing to stop you from giving weapons to somebody else, nor is there anything to stop this kind of paper trail where these guys didn't care if these weapons ended up in the hands of certain people who weren't necessarily the most savory, as long as those people were trying to take out Assad. That's what they didn't care about. Now, You can make a case that said if they took out Assad, maybe it would give a pretext to say, hey, we have a terrorist, batshit crazy state. Now we need to take that state down, in which case you can implement whatever government you want when you take down that state and put in somebody, your own puppet ruler. I don't know. This plan itself seems absurd on its face if you look at it from the standpoint of the United States is trying to help a bunch of terrorists to take over a nation. It sounds weird. It only makes sense when you realize that the terrorist allows a pretext for the United States to get further involved in that conflict without the rest of the world being freaked out by it. After all, let's say Assad goes. Let's say you have ISIS, who have this bloodthirsty regime. Is it possible that the United States has made plans to interact with the bloodthirsty regime to be friends with us? In which case, that's all we care about, if they're friends with us. But let's say they're not friends with us. Does it give you more of a pretext to actually go in further, seeing as the Assad government has been taken down and you have a group of terrorists who've taken over the country? I don't know. The plan just seemed absurd on its face. But Fisk is right for pointing out the absurdity of this. We're fighting terrorists. We're fighting Assad. But if the terrorists just so happen to beat Assad with our weapons, terrorists are now in charge. It's weird. There's a little bit more of this I want to read, and then I'm going to let it go. The Al-Nusra can be the recipients of missiles from our friends, quote unquote, in the region here. Please forget the EUCs or from those mythical moderates who in turn hands them over to ISIS or Al-Nusra for cash, favors, fear, or fratricidal war and surrender. It is a fact, I'm sorry to recall, that of all the weapons I saw used in the 15-year Lebanese war in 1975 and 1990, not one was in the hands of those whom the same weapons were originally sold. I love this historical context. I love historical context. Russian and Bulgarian Kalashnikovs sold to Syria were used by the Palestinian guerrillas. Old American tanks employed by the Lebanese Christian Phalange Lebanese forces were gifts from the Israelis who received them from the United States. These outrageous weapons shipments were constantly recorded at the time, but in such a way that they might imagine that the transfer were enshrined into law. The Phalange, in fact, also collected bunches of British, Soviet, French, and Yugoslav armor to Zastava arms factory in the Serbian city of Klajstvik, which has just visited, featured among some of the latter for their battles. He's making a very historical point. Weapons that were used in that war, and many times never landed or never stayed in the hands of the people you sold them to. The people you sold them to usually always sold them to somebody else. I don't know if always, but he's making a really good point. Think of weapons in the United States. Weapons, let's say for example, weapons laws in one country are pretty much non-existent. People go to that state, get those weapons, and sell them in another state. It's like the person who buys the weapons. How do you know that the weapon ends in the hands of the person who buys it? And in these cases of these large weapon shipments, in many cases they didn't. They would have all of these weapons, missile casings, and he could track these missile casings back to the United States. Missile cases in the hands of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. That is a terrifying prospect. That is a terrifying prospect. Yeah, totally by accident. Yeah, Khalida, totally by accident. It's totally by accident. All indications we give ISIS, intel and satellite intel support. Not just satellite intel support, but weapons. Weapons. Like, we are helping terrorists. That should cause you some level of difficulty. Like, that should bother you. These people who are chopping off heads and putting people in cages and drowning them underwater. By hook or by crook, they're getting weapons and money from us. Or at least they were. Or at least they were. Sort of futile, though. I doubt that oak 2x4 upside the head is enough to convince people to stop supporting the establishment. I don't know, man. D. Martin, 1 million super chat. Why isn't this going through? Damn, I'll have to get back to you later, JT. D. Martin, that's so not funny. That's too soon. Too soon, D. Martin. Too soon. Wouldn't it be treasonous considering we aren't at war with ISIS? Well, it would be treason. These came from a military base. Dark, roasty, lefty. These came from a military base. Later on in the article, the guy makes the point that there's a base that these come from, but he doesn't necessarily know the base. It's in the United States, but he wasn't actually able to track down the specific base, even though they knew it was coming from a base in the States. So right here. Let's start here. But back to guns and artillery. Why don't NATO track all of these weapons as they leave Europe and America? Why don't they expose the real end users of these deadly shipments? The arm manufacturers I spoke to in the Balkans attested that NATO and the United States were fully aware of the buyers of all of the machine guns and mortars. Why can't the details of those glorious end user certificates be made public, as open and as free for us to view as the frightful weapons which the manufacturers are happy to boast in their catalogs? It was instructive that the Independent asked the Saudis last week to respond to the Bosnian weapons shipment documents. I found in Aleppo last year, which the factory's own weapons controllers recalled were sent from Novi Trenovic to Saudi Arabia. They replied that they, the Saudis, did not provide support of any kind to the terrorist organizations and that al-Nusra and ISIS were designated terrorist organizations by the Saudis' royal decree and that the allegations were vague and unfounded. I love that. But what did this mean? The government's statements in response to the detailed reports of arms shipments should not be the last word, and it is an important question that remained unanswered in the Saudi statement. The Saudis themselves had asked for copies of the shipment documents, yet when they did not specifically say whether or not they received the shipment of the mortars, nor comment upon the actual papers which the Independent sent to them. He's making the point it wasn't vague or otherwise. These guys had weapons. They got the shipment. And when you ask them about it, they say, oh, we need papers. We need something. We need some other identification. We don't want to talk about this. We don't want to talk about this. Look, the question to some degree is basic, and what Robert Fisk is asking is right. Shouldn't the European Union, the United States, shouldn't NATO know where these weapons are going? Shouldn't they have some idea? If they really cared, if it was a big deal to them, should they have some mechanism in place to ensure that they don't end up in the hands of terrorists? And as it is, the answer is no. And to some degree, you can make a case that the answer is no intentionally, especially when it comes to the case of Syria. So, I am going to end this. Bob Ramirez, I heard HA his super chat. He must be spreading the right thinking. I have no idea. All I know is they said I copied videos. I want to know the videos, so at the very least I can get rid of the videos that supposedly I copied. I have no copyright violations. I have nothing from my understanding that says my videos did anything wrong, nor do I have any guidelines that I've breached. I've showed that in the other video. So I don't know. All right, I'm going to end this here. Baltazar, rip my joke above. What did you say, Baltazar? I didn't see it, Baltazar. You happy now, Jade Jamal? If you had voted for Hillary, our military-industrial complex wouldn't be able to discriminate against bombs based in the bomb's gender identity. Robbie Mook wouldn't be able to discriminate against bomb based on the bomb's gender identity. Jesus Christ, I don't know what a bomb's gender identity is. What is a bomb's gender identity? Yeah, I don't know if any of the channels are affected. I will be curious to know if they are. Yeah, they don't need a reason. It's a private company. Join TYT Network. It's like a protection racket. Oh, God. Well, I severely doubt this would ever happen to TYT. They're probably in good with YouTube on this. So, do some UFO and sell it harder. They'll back off. You're just being sensible and serious. You know, it's funny. I tried to pitch a UFO show to a radio network. So we'll see. Apparently there was an idea where they might be looking for shows, and they were like, a show that's not boring. I have an idea for a show that's not boring. What if it's a UFO show? What if we talk about, but not crazy UFO stuff. UFO stuff like I do on this channel, where it's not insane or bad shit. And not even just UFO. The OBEs, the weird and the interesting. Not in a off the reservation way, but in a, this is real. This is some degree mainstream, but at the extreme end of mainstream. Like a show done in a way that's odd, interesting, that even if you disagree with everything that's in the show will be so damn interesting you still listen to it. Stuff like that. So, Jamal, you may want to consider swearing less. New guidelines passed in June includes the use of obscene language. That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, look, this kind of goes back to my thing of why Patreon and PayPal and all that other stuff is important. TYT is YouTube pampered princess. They promote the fuck out of them. Yes, they do. Give them the preferential treatment, etc. They have been there since the start of YouTube. Well, yeah, and they have, what, 4 million subscribers at this point. So you can kind of see why. Jamal is too sexist. Without a female co-anchor, he's screwed. Is that what it is? Is that what it is? If JT is getting demonetized, then drop F-bombs all you want. No, so here's the thing. They said it wasn't F-bombs. They said I was using other material. And it's like, okay, well, what was the material I was using? In which case, they were completely silent on. There were no copyright strikes or violations. In fact, I can show it myself. Yeah, there were no copyright strikes or violations. So, as far as I know, and they haven't given me any details of something that's wrong, so I don't know what they're talking about. So, all right, guys, I will end this here. If you enjoyed the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through Patreon. Thanks, guys. I'm looking at J. Scott. Balthazar's wife reported Jamal to get super chat taken away. That's fucking hilarious. That's fucking hilarious. That's fucking hilarious. All right, guys. You have a good one. I'll see you shortly. Bye-bye.